This Russian-made T-72 pushes toward Ukrainian positions around Kharkiv, launching a direct assault. Here you can clearly see just how resilient the Ukrainian defensive lines are. Shells detonate only a few meters from their trenches. Very few soldiers could withstand pressure this intense. Russian forces had already attempted to capture this position before. To pinpoint the source of the incoming fire, Ukrainian troops deploy a reconnaissance drone over the area. The drone quickly identifies the tank and begins tracking it. Moments later, soldiers of the 47th Brigade launch a modified FPV kamikaze drone loaded with modernized ammunition. The tank crew spots the incoming threat and desperately tries to escape the strike zone. The detonation makes that abundantly clear. There will be no breakthrough here for Russian forces. This front line in Ukraine has remained one of the hottest conflict zones on the planet. Both sides constantly refine their tactics in an effort to gain the upper hand. You've seen countless examples of Ukrainian FPV drones blasting the turrets off tanks and reducing heavy armor to piles of twisted scrap. In response, Russia has turned to unusual turtle tanks, vehicles wrapped in thick metal plating, designed to carry infantry far closer to the front line than a standard armored personnel carrier ever could. But as you'll see in this footage, Ukrainians have already adapted to this new strategy as well. This T-72 racing in as reinforcement is the latest example. Ukrainian forces spot the tank and immediately launch a homemade FPV drone armed with an anti-armor warhead. The drone hits the engine compartment with precision. Realizing the danger, the crew abandons the moving tank before the situation worsens. Look closely at the turret. Even the drone defense jamming grid mounted on top wasn't enough to save it. Meanwhile, the FPV operator lines up a second strike from above, guiding the drone toward the turret's weak underside. The crew is lucky. They escaped just moments before the explosion. And here is another symbol of Russian pride: a T-90 main battle tank abandoned by its crew after triggering a mine. Even with its antennas, wire cages, and various defensive add-ons, none of it worked. To counter this, Russian forces developed their so-called turtle tank design. It may look strange at first, but they clearly believe in its effectiveness. With most BMPs and MTLBs destroyed, they needed a safer way to transport infantry, and this unconventional tank variant emerged as the solution. You've probably seen the footage showing these heavily plated vehicles delivering troops safely to areas where lighter carriers would have been obliterated. Believing this approach improves troop transport and offers extra protection against light FPV drones, Russia has continued to refine the design. The T-72 you see here is one of these turtle variants, often moving through open fields riddled with mines. To protect the chassis, the tank is equipped with a mine-clearing plow. All this extra metal significantly increases the tank's weight, pushing the engine to its limits. This turtle tank successfully delivered infantry to their positions 4 separate times, until now. Here you're watching real footage of the tank crossing a mine-infested field in Ukraine. It rolls over several mines in a row. Look at the force of the blasts and the metal fragments flying in every direction. The vehicle finally comes to a complete stop. The driver panics and abandons the tank. What remains will likely be destroyed shortly after. But the Ukrainians don't stop there. They've upgraded their FPV drones with new warheads capable of tearing through these turtle tanks with ease. In this clip, another turtle hits a mine and becomes immobilized. Despite enemy radar and jamming systems, The upgraded FPV drone calmly closes in. The new warhead obliterates the Russian turtle tank in seconds. Russian forces launched a coordinated assault on Ukrainian positions from several directions at once. Multiple tanks equipped with anti-drone defenses advanced in stages toward the village line. It didn't take long for the armored vehicles to enter the range of Ukrainian artillery. A series of precise Ukrainian artillery strikes slowed the Russian push, though they couldn't halt it entirely. Still, that barrage brought something crucial: the time needed for FPV drone teams to prepare. Several FPV units moved quickly, sending their drones into the air to hunt down the Russian vehicles. The pilot of the first kamikaze drone took the initiative and struck immediately. Luck was on his side this time. The drone hit its target exactly as planned. As the second tank attempted to maneuver around the damaged vehicle, it too was locked onto by another FPV drone. But disabling two tanks wasn't enough. A new wave of FPVs was already being readied for the next strike. Russian anti-drone defenses were effective, but Ukrainian operators were equally skilled. The lead vehicle in the convoy had to endure more than 3 direct drone hits before it was fully stopped. Moments later, the second vehicle in line was destroyed as well. The entire convoy became a target, and Russian forces began losing their armored vehicles one after another. The fact that more drones were needed per kill shows just how much the Russians have improved their counter-drone systems. Now focus on this particular Russian armored vehicle. Russian troops reinforced it with a dense mesh of metal cables wrapped around its hull. This previously unseen method appeared as a new kind of defensive modification. Breaking through this type of barrier may require far more drones, possibly up to 10. Even so, the cost of FPVs remains tiny compared to the value of the tanks they destroy. Given how effective they've been, we'll likely see these improvised protection systems appearing on more Russian vehicles. At one point, a group of Russian tanks attempted a rapid breakthrough of the Ukrainian defensive line. But Ukrainian FPV teams had already set up an ambush, waiting until the vehicles moved into the ideal strike zone. The attack was devastatingly effective. Capitalizing on Russian carelessness, Ukrainian forces began systematically targeting every vehicle within range. Realizing what was happening, Russian soldiers sensed the incoming drone strikes and abandoned their armored vehicles in a hurry. This time, the FPV pilot had an extra advantage. The fleeing soldiers had left the hatch open. Attacking the inside of a vehicle remains one of the most effective and cheapest methods available. The result came quickly. A skilled flight combined with a bit of luck produced a spectacular explosion. For a brief, almost surreal period in the chaos of modern warfare, something truly unusual appeared on the front lines. Vehicles so heavily modified, so oddly shaped, that soldiers and observers alike began calling them turtle tanks. At first glance, they looked almost comical. Old T-72 or T-80 models, completely covered in welded metal plates, wire mesh, makeshift cages, and other improvised additions, moved slowly across the battlefield like armored turtles. Their strange, bulky appearance almost made them look absurd, yet behind every bent metal plate and awkward reinforcement lay a very real logic. These vehicles were created out of necessity, fear, and desperation. The primary reason these tanks were developed was the rise of cheap, explosive-laden FPV drones that had transformed even open terrain into deadly zones. Traditional tank armor, no matter how thick, suddenly had glaring weaknesses. Small, nimble drones could approach from angles that were previously safe and strike at weak points in turrets, engines, and top hatches. Losses were mounting quickly, and there was no immediate high-tech solution available. Expensive active protection systems existed, but they were costly and slow to produce, and not every unit could access them. In this context, a practical, if imperfect, solution was needed. The turtle tank was born from this need. A mobile, armored shell intended to absorb, deflect, or at least delay the impact of drone attacks. These tanks were not designed for speed or advanced combat. They were designed for survival. Their heavy metal shells and added armor made them cumbersome, slow, and sometimes almost unmanageable. Crews had limited visibility, and turret rotation was often severely restricted. Engines were stressed to their limits, fuel consumption increased, and maneuvering became a challenge. Yet, despite these drawbacks, the concept worked in its limited way. Turtle tanks could push through dangerous, drone-infested areas, clear minefields, and carry soldiers or supplies across zones that otherwise would have been deadly. In a sense, they were less about fighting and more about reaching safety. The strategy behind deploying these vehicles was straightforward. By sending a turtle tank ahead, units could create a temporary shield or distraction for other vehicles and personnel. Mines could be detonated at a safe distance from the main force, obstacles could be breached, and soldiers could follow behind under a slightly safer cover. They were, in a way, a mobile, armored experiment in battlefield adaptation, an acknowledgement that modern warfare was evolving faster than traditional equipment and tactics could keep up with. However, these modifications were far from perfect, and their limitations quickly became apparent. While the armor could sometimes stop or deflect drone attacks, FPV operators were remarkably adaptable. They quickly learned to exploit small gaps in the cage, weak points around the turret, or even attack from angles that the added plating could not cover. The slow speed of the vehicles made them more vulnerable to artillery strikes or anti-tank guided missiles. In many engagements, turtle tanks survived initial encounters only to be disabled or destroyed shortly thereafter. Their very existence was a temporary patch, a stopgap solution in a rapidly changing battlefield. The cost of building these tanks varied. Some were made from cheap scrap metal, welded together hastily in workshops near the front lines. Others required significant time, labor, and coordination to ensure that the added weight did not completely immobilize the vehicle. Still, even at their highest cost, a turtle tank was far cheaper than a modern active protection system or a newly manufactured tank. The logic was simple. A few $100s worth of metal and welding could potentially save a multi-million-dollar vehicle, or at least delay its destruction. But as the conflict evolved, turtle tanks became obsolete. Advances in drone technology, electronic warfare, and improved vehicle armor made these clumsy, improvised creations unnecessary. The battlefield changed faster than these makeshift solutions could adapt. Today, turtle tanks are rarely, if ever, seen. They exist mainly as a peculiar footnote in the history of armored warfare, a fascinating example of battlefield improvisation, creativity, and the desperation that comes when traditional tools are no longer sufficient.